Hi, thank you for joining and welcome to session CS 8.1, the pandemic and learning space of the future, lessons from a corporate workplace. In my opinion, you're the luckiest people at the conference right now because you've signed up to arguably the best session of the day. So let me deal with some of the housekeeping first, and then I'll introduce the team. Don't forget you can use the hashtag TMC conference at any point. If you have any difficulties with the session, click on the red headset icon in the lobby to speak to the live support team, who've been great over the last day and a half. Questions, we'll deal with questions through the Q&A session at the end. So please use the live Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and get your questions in there, and we'll try and hit the most popular ones. And if there are questions which we have not answered through the presentation, I'm sure the speakers will be happy to write the responses at the end and put a few minutes into that. And you can also contact them directly through the usual media channels. So our two great presenters for you, we've got Associate Professor Remy Ayoko and we've got Jared Lillywhite. So let me introduce them quickly because they don't give us much time. If you do want to find out more about these, in your abstract online booklet, and the details of this session are on page 26 or abstract 76. So Remy is an associate professor of management and management discipline leader in the UQ Business School at the University of Queensland, Australia. She's an award-winning researcher and widely published, and she's also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Management and Organization and on many editorial boards. Jared is Jared Lillywhite leads Aurecon's property and place portfolio across Australia, including precincts expertise in Queensland. He's an executive engineer and has over 20 years experience in all aspects of state-of-the-art buildings, precincts and places. Jared adopts a holistic approach to engineering and has a passion for human-centric design and environmental sustainability. So there's my 15 seconds of fame. I'll now hand you over to our great presenters, and they'll have your attention for the next 25 minutes.
Thank you very much, Hilary, and welcome everybody to our presentation. So I'm just going to start, as you know, that we are presenting on the pandemic and the learning spaces of the future, lessons from a corporate workplace. As I've been introduced, I will be taking on the slides today, but I have here a privilege to collaborate with Jared Lillywhite of Aurecon, and we will be co-presenting today. So when it gets to the time, I would let you know when Jared will be coming on. So I wanted to start this presentation with an overview. And the overview basically is that in these next 26 minutes or so that we have, I will talk quickly about UQ Aurecon partnership. I would also talk about the research objectives, the pandemic, and the learning spaces of the future, which is our research objective. I will talk a little bit about the research issues, the research questions, and the studies that we have done. And we all know that the pandemic has thrown a spanner into the way we operate every day. So the pandemic changed the way teaching and learning is done, for example. Not only has it changed the way teaching and learning has been done and is usually done, but it's also changed the way organizations actually manage their employees and how organization employees actually work. So the COVID has changed the higher education sector. It's changed employees' orientation to flexible, remote, or virtual working. And so in this presentation, we are using a corporate organization as a case study of what maybe, for example, a post-pandemic campus might look like. So the big question is, what can universities learn from corporate organizations such as Aurecon, for example? And so in this presentation overall, we will be talking about 3 research studies that we have done before and just after the pandemic. The pandemic is not gone completely, but we were in lockdown at a point. And some areas in Australia still experience lockdown as I talk, but it's not like what we had before when we didn't know what to do with it. So now we'll be talking about those 3 studies, and we're hoping that we will draw insights from these 3 studies into what universities may be able to learn from this corporate organization. So if I have the next slide, Jared. So I'll be talking about UQ overview and UQ and Aurecon partnership. As you know, UQ is one of the Australian's leading research and teaching institutions in Australia. I've joined UQ for about 20 years now. We pride ourselves in striving for excellence through the creation or preservation, transfer of knowledge and application of knowledge. So we just don't do research for the sake of research. We do research that actually matter to organizational issues that can get real in the world out there. Aurecon is another giant in the field. Aurecon is an engineering, designing, and advisory company, which in 2020 was named by the Australian Financial Review as Australia's most innovative company and most innovative professional service company. So this is partnership between 2 giants in the field. Our partnership dates back like about more than a decade now, but formalized in 2018. And the vision is to keep on doing joint innovative offerings in unconventional settings, delivering benefits for both Aurecon and UQ, and hence this particular project. So if I have the next slide, I'll be talking straight into surveys 1 and 2, which was motivated by what would the learning future, the learning campus of the future look like? What will it look like for organizations who are battling with people coming back to the office? So I hand you over to Jared, who will be able to talk to us about surveys 1 and 2.
Thanks, Remy. Yeah, so look, we've conducted 2 surveys over the last 12 months. The first was in May of last year, so I guess it was fairly early days in terms of the pandemic. And a lot of our various offices across Australia and New Zealand were in different states of, lockdown uptake. So we decided to conduct a survey that was of about 300 of our staff, and quite a diverse portfolio or a diverse range of staff from the actual technical engineering disciplines through to project managers, human resources. So we picked a very diverse group. It was about 60 questions, multi-choice questions, along with, I guess, a series of opportunities to provide additional comments. And what we found on the left-hand side of the screen there is these are just a couple of the key takeaways. We did a whole bunch of analysis on the data and rolled up some of the qualitative comments, but even at the time, it was quite early, sort of 5 months into the pandemic, we were finding that about just shy of 70% of our staff were already missing working from the office. And that was quite a surprise at the time. And when we actually broke that down, the graph just to the right of that pie graph there, we were sort of seeing some of the reasons why people were missing the office. And a lot of it was around this kind of ability to collaborate in physical terms with others, which is probably no surprise to many of you listening today. So I guess fast forward 12 months, in sort of months of May of June this year, 2021, we've conducted a similar survey, asking the same group a similar bunch of questions. I guess the motivation for the follow-up survey was that it has been a further 12 months, things have evolved. We had some regions that were stuck in lockdown, obviously more than others, but we still tried to, I guess, gather data across all of those offices to understand, well, how are people actually working now, and what do the results, how have they changed? And what we found was the figures for staff that were missing working from the office, the figures were still very similar, around the 70% mark. But we'd found that people had effectively fell into a bit more of a structure. So you can see on the right-hand side there, we kind of identified 4 kind of workplaces as this kind of the future workplaces as an ecology of sub-workplaces. So we had this sort of central community place, which was the sort of more traditional collaborative office where you could interact in an office environment in a collaborative way. You had your sort of personal workstation in the office where you could do sort of focused tasks but then break out to those collaboration spaces. Obviously, we had the home workstation, and many people have obviously become quite accustomed to that, and have determined, I guess, what tasks can be done more productively and efficiently in that workstation, home workstation environment versus the office or workplace workstation environment. And then finally, remote places. So I guess with the onset of the pandemic and this sort of flexible working from home, many of our employees have actually taken comfort and found it efficient to work even in remote places, and that could be a coffee shop, for example. So that was really the key findings from those first two surveys. So I'll hand back to Remy, who'll talk to, I guess, the most recent survey we've done specifically here in Brisbane.
Thank you very much, Jared. In study 3, we were looking at a qualitative study per se, and we wanted to follow up on the questions that were asked in surveys 1 and 2, and just to find out whether there is any shift in what the people are thinking about now and what they said in the last 2 surveys. So we had a sample of 220 Aurecon employees, and specifically for 25 King Street, Aurecon building in Brisbane. We conducted 10 interview. We had 10 interview questions covering some of the survey questions, but also adding new questions on learning and collaboration after the pandemic. The questions covered productivity, human factor issues, health and well-being, knowledge transfer, because we were suspecting that because people were not together in the offices, that there is a possibility that there is a gap in knowledge transfer and collaboration. So we asked them directly what their thoughts were around knowledge transfer and their aspirations moving forward. So if I go to the next slide. So when we collected this sample, each interview was about 35 to 45 minutes. And with 20 people, we put the text in a learning machine that is called Leximancer. Many of you will be very familiar with Leximancer. Leximancer basically is a learning machine that allows us to generate a text learning machine that allows us to generate conceptual maps that depicts the relationship between identified themes and concepts that people have talked about in a given set of corpus. So this is what we have, and we thought this is an interesting kind of finding. So first, I wanted to show you these bubbles that, or bubbles or themes that Leximancer actually produced for us. And in the left-hand corner, you see those bubbles. They gave us a relationship between concept and frequency of themes. The first thing I want to say about the bubbles will be this. The size of the bubble and the color of the bubble say a lot of things. So the more warm the colors are, like red and orange, all of that, it says how significant that particular theme is, and that people said a lot of things about the theme. If the size of the bubble is big, it also says something about the relevance and the importance of what people are saying there. So what we have here is a capture of what Leximancer is giving to us in terms of themes that is captured only at 20% frequency at that point. So we can generate this to 80%, 100%, and it will give us something a little bit different. It will give out more words in each of the bubbles, and you can see the connection. One of the things I really want to draw your attention quickly to in all of these bubbles is that I want you to notice the biggest bubbles that we have there. We have home, we have people, we have transitioning, and we have clients. So a lot of the people in our interviews talked more about working from home versus working from the office. And when we talk about people, the need of the people, and then of course, how do we transition back is all about knowledge transfer and the experiences. They also talked about their clients, the places where they work, the COVID issues, and the colleagues that they are missing. And notice that we have Aurecon at the end over there. But more importantly, I want you to take a note about the intersection and overlapping between the bulbs. So, and I'm just going to give you 2 quick examples. So with home and people, for example, you can see in the middle of that warm bubbles that home and people are they have an overlap, and also they have an overlap with transitioning. So when people were talking about home and clients and people and transitioning, they were all crisscrossing because those things are connected. We're talking about the relationship between the themes. Those things are connected in their thought. I also draw your attention to the frequencies that we have there. Home is the biggest issue talked about, which is about 564 hits. And then, of course, people, the needs of the people. The needs of the people will be quite interesting when we talk about the learning campus of the future, or what the campus of the future should be when we talk about the pandemic. If I have the next slide, please, I can summarize what these findings are saying. Next slide, Jared, please. Okay, thank you. So in our next slide, I wanted to draw your attention to the key insights from the interview. So majority wanted to go back to the office, but wanted to go back only 1 or 2 days from working from home. They wanted to work from home 1 or 2 days post pandemic, and this says a lot. As I talk through these insights, I also want us to, at the back of our mind, think about the campus, how these can inform the campus moving forward. The other biggest attraction to the office is about connectedness. People want to connect themselves. They want to socialize. They want to collaborate. They know that knowledge transfer can take on in a digitally put together in an environment that is digitally connected, but the in-person collaboration and knowledge transfer, you cannot play around with that because that's supreme to them. Corporate workplace is now an ecosystem. I think Jared mentioned something like that, ecosystem of workplaces where we have different things going on at different times. And as you saw in his last slide, he was talking about community space, focused space, socializing space, maybe restaurant or key places where people can take lunch. In any way, this ecosystem is what the experience that a lot of people are looking for in coming back to work. The physical workplace are still the most productive for collaboration, innovation, brainstorming, experimenting, and knowledge transfer. These corroborate some of the findings we have had in surveys 1 and survey 2. And this is quite important for us to connect those findings. The key then is to create an experience with infrastructure to entice people to the workspace or learning space in the end of the day. So how do organizations bring these people back? We need an ecosystem of workplaces where people can feel a little bit sticky with each other and can do life together. If I have the last slide in our presentation today, perhaps. I think in this slide, we put together the lessons for higher education sector. So when everything has been said and done, study 1, study 2, study 3, and then we've told you about the finding. The real issue then is, what can higher education take away from all of our findings? And I put together here 3 major issues that we think are worth thinking about when we start talking about the learning space of the future. First is the ecosystem of workspace, which I've just talked about. Community space, focused work, flexible workspace, working from home, people working from the beach, people working from cafe. Well, to do that well, you will need to have a powerful technological platform. You won't be able to do that if you don't have a powerful technological platform. So the technological platform is what is an enabler for these ecosystem of workspaces. So perhaps what campuses actually need more than ever is to get this ecosystem of learning spaces where students can come in and have this community kind of space where they can interact with each other, where they can do focused work, not just in the library, but in little spaces all over the campus, flexible spaces, as well as, working from home, technology-driven situation for high quality work from home and productivity from home. The other thing that we thought was very important for us to mention in terms of lessons that higher education sector can learn is that there is always going to be a place for people interaction, whether it's about intellectual interaction, whether we need a structure or a process. In other words, we need to schedule a time. We need to be very upfront and intentional about the time that we want to use in either interacting with one another, putting a process together in this area, or time to collaborate, or maybe even the water cooler conversations that happen when you come back to work. These are not going to be by chance. It has to be a deliberate plan or deliberate intention, and organizations have to put this at the back of their mind and work towards it. It's not something that will happen like that. In my research with my PhD students, we find out that just putting people in a place where they think we might always think that, yes, they will collaborate for the same reason. No, we find out no. Collaboration doesn't just occur instantly like that. You have to build a structure around it for that collaboration to actually take place and become a reality. When all is said and done, high quality, attractive spaces that are like a magnet, a glue, a glue point, sticky places within the campus might probably be the way to go. So this magnet of spaces, learning spaces, collaboration spaces, um, uh, individual independent workspaces on the campus probably might be the thing that will bring the students back to the campus if you want them to come back to the campus. And so on this note, I would like to say thank you. I think we've just opened up a conversation, and this conversation doesn't stop on these 3 lessons. We are hoping that all of you out there will be able to join the conversation. We've just only split the bean a little bit, and we hope that this is the beginning of the conversation that universities should be having moving forward. Thank you so much for listening to us. On behalf of Jared, thank you so much. So we open the session up for questions.
Thank you, Remy. Thank you, Jared. That was very insightful, very informative. I've been through the Aurecon office in Brisbane, and if any of you are down there, it's definitely worth getting hold of someone and getting a tour. I'm sure Jared would be happy to facilitate that. There's a lot to be learned from it. We've got some very long transcripts in the discussion forum and a few interesting questions in the live Q&A. If I start with phase 1 at the top, is there any data on how returning to the office preference results relate to age groups, home, family type, conditions, other demographics? So when you've done your surveys, can you speak to the different age groups, the younger, older age groups, and how you think returning to the office impacts the different age groups or their perspective on it?
We certainly did collect that data. The first and second surveys definitely did strip out that data. I don't have the specifics at hand, but we did absolutely get that data, and it did demonstrate obviously that certain age groups, demographics, geographical location of home to office did impact the results, absolutely.
Okay. I think that would be a real interesting aspect. I'd be very curious from my own university's perspective on that. Do you think, is there a possibility we can share some of that later? Thank you, Jared.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, we've got all of that information. We just didn't want to overload the PowerPoint pack, that's all.
Thank you very much. There's a really another good, interesting question from Steve. Do you have information about the difference of returning to the office with comparison for people who live on routes of good public transport? So if you're on an easy transport route, were they more inclined to say, yes, I'd like to come back to the office more often than people who live further from the office?
Okay, I'll take my shot and then Jared can finish the rest off. So in survey 1, survey 2, and even in study 3, which is the qualitative study, we did ask people about sustainability issue, carbon footprint, etc., etc. And from study 3, for example, one of the things that a lot of people said would be that, well, if I don't have to come to the office and I don't have to travel in public transport or come with my car, then I'm saving the environment and the carbon footprint is lowered, that kind of thing. But my question every now and again when people say that is, at what cost? At what cost? I do research in workspaces. At what cost is that? So yes, we reduce carbon footprint, except we can put money on the carbon footprint, and I'm for reducing carbon footprint. But I think we need a kind of a balance here, because your team members in the organization are actually waiting for you to connect with you, because while you are sitting at home and you are doing all of this, we know that the genie is out of the box, or out of the bottle already, and that people who now have worked from home during the lockdown are happy to continue to work from home. But it's also a little bit detrimental to your team members who actually need you for mentoring, who need you to show them what to do, who need them to increase their productivity, etc., etc. Yes, sustainability is important for us. Reducing carbon footprint is important for us, but we also need to balance that up with, connecting your team members and helping them to grow. Jared?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, it's an interesting conundrum because the staff who traditionally lived near public transport and had good public transport access to work, obviously, it would be easy for them to come into the office. However, what we found is some of our staff, employees, I guess, depending on the region, were somewhat scared to use public transport, until vaccination levels of light get up. Those staff who were traditionally happy to transport in, but were perhaps a little bit more standoffish. So we found this very interesting conundrum.
Thank you. There's a really interesting mix of questions here about the open plan or collaborative environment, depending on how you want to title it, depending on whether you're an academic or professional staff member, maybe. You knew this was coming, didn't you, Remy?
I'll let Remy answer that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we go to the last question on it there, it seems to capture a few of the views. How do you tackle the argument, mainly from academics, about open plan space, which encourages conversation, which leads to collaboration? And the question continues to say, but the academics hate open plan. So how do we get the balance right, Remy, and how do we find the solution? I think there's 50-odd universities are tussling at the same problem.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question and an interesting question at the same time. This is what we try to do as researchers working in workspaces. In this regard, and actually my research interest is open plan offices. So the first thing that I wanted to say is that there's always these paradox around open plan offices. It's a paradox because a lot of research that we have done would say it's good for collaboration, it's good for communication, it's good. That openness allows me to know what is happening around me so I can learn from senior people. But at the same time, a lot of people complain about lack of privacy, that there is noise, that, I find it very difficult to concentrate. So we have these paradox going on about open plan office. The other concept that I want to quickly put in, I know we have only 1 minute to go, is people are territorial. People generally, and maybe academics more so, because of the nature of the work we do, that you have to do your work in a solo environment when you are writing and you're doing all of these things. People tend to be a little bit territorial about the workspaces that they have. Now, territoriality is good, but when it is in excess, it can be bad. Territoriality is good for identity. This is who you are. You prefer a quiet place and you want to get your job done. Focused work, and that's it. And you don't want to share that with anybody else. But when we start thinking about cost, which is what our employers in universities are thinking about, when we think about cost, it's more cost effective to have open plan offices. So now we have to draw a boundary or find an equilibrium or a balance between who gets to share the cell rooms and who gets to be in open plan offices. We already know that professional staff members do well in open plan offices, but not the academics are still kicking against that one way or the other. So we put together a research team now that is looking at that balance. And we put out 2 surveys to find out where that balance would be with people. So this is where we are. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Remy. We look forward to you coming back next year and presenting us with the solutions. That's the end of the Q&A. I apologize that we didn't get to everyone's questions, but if Remy and Jared have a few minutes, they may try and type some answers in, but you can get hold of them through the normal channels to have direct conversations. So, so to close out today, look, thank you everyone who attended. I hope you found that rewarding and interesting. I definitely did. And I know you need now to return to the timeline to join the next session, which starts quite soon. So again, thank you to everyone, and all the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you. We have
Thanks,
our
all.
email addresses there, and you can contact us through those email addresses. We'll stick around for another 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Remy, can you put those email addresses up in the chat function, maybe?
Okay. How?